Welcome back to 1001 Nights of Reading the World. I'm Mike, and today discussing Willem Frederik Hermans' Beyond Sleep for the country of the Netherlands, Low Countries, Holland. Yeah, so this 1966 novel is about a Dutch geologist named Alfred Isendorf who is on a scientific expedition to Norway. The entire book pretty much takes place in Norway, and he's with a group of Norwegian scientists as well. Going into the northern regions during the Norwegian summer, so 24 hours of daylight, in order to try to prove that a series of craters were caused by meteorites. And that really is mostly it. If I were to describe this novel in one word, which you should never do, so don't, it's an elusive book is what I wanted to say, but I think a better way to describe it is that Willem Frederik Hermans has an incredible gift for restraint. There is so much restraint shown in this novel as there is a sort of rhythm between this movement north that this team of scientists is making. So just walking, camping, eating, just their mundane, basic journey toward the north, kind of interspersed with the main characters' Alfred Isendorf's thoughts and obsessions, particularly with a set of aerial photographs that he's been sent, or believes to have been sent, on a bit of a wild goose chase to try to track down, and constantly asking himself, why did he even go on this expedition without these aerial photographs being so important to his investigation. And then we get what I think are kind of the glue that really holds this book together, and not just the glue, but the sort of what adds kind of a layer underneath all of this are the conversations between the geologist Alfred and these other scientists he's with, particularly Arne. I think it's A-R-N-E. I'm going to go with Arne is the name of one of them, who he seems to have a little bit of resentment toward for reasons that aren't clear to begin with, but there's these sort of philosophical conversations. So you have this rhythm. You have this rhythm from sort of the mundane aspects of their journey north, the main geologist, Dutch geologist's thoughts and obsessions, and these philosophical conversations. And this rhythm kind of cycles over throughout most of the book. But there's this incredible restraint where not one of these sections ever oversteps into really, going deep down into anything. Like the philosophical conversations are always kind of like a tease. There's a little bit there, enough to make you think, enough to make you want a little more, enough to send your mind spiraling in a certain direction, but then it's quickly pulled in towards some, just basic physical something that's happening. And then once in a while, there will be a fall. Somebody will fall or get hurt, mainly our Dutch geologist. It's a really hard book to describe, and even more difficult to discuss in depth without, I guess, what I'd call spoilers, because at the same time that I want to say you can't really spoil this book because it's kind of all in the details. Also, if you start talking about the details, there's really not much else to the book. So it's really an enigma, this one, and for a few reasons. Besides what I already mentioned, another reason is I don't think I've ever read a book that focuses specifically on geology as a sort of symbol. It appears to be a symbol. I mean, this sort of the Alfred's obsession, and he is in fact the narrator. So when I'm saying the main character, this is in first person. Alfred is narrating this. But there are times that we kind of lose ourselves in the conversations that he's happening, and it's just kind of a back and forth of dialogue, that it's easy to forget in those moments that this is in first person, and those sections are important for kind of breaking us out of the main character's psychology, and an important sort of break in and part of that rhythm, that cycle that I was talking about. So but there's even an awareness of the strangeness of having a main character who is a scientist, and specifically a geologist, because there's the opening of one chapter, and I think it's toward the second half of the book, where the narrator is about to well, he drops basically a scientific term about how the plane looks, like what kind of soil is covering the terrain that he's currently on, and then reminisces about the fact that, well, you're going to have to look that word up, because, and then kind of has a self-aware moment of, this is why books aren't written from the perspective of particular scientists. The only careers that end up being featured in novels are caricatures of ones that the public can easily digest, police people and cowboys and so on. So I thought that was an interesting reflection as well. And so this book, while it is from the perspective of the geologist, is not really it doesn't get into the whole terminology, the nitty-gritty of geology or anything like that. It uses the idea of geology and this obsession with the meteors and the craters and the aerial photos that you know, he can't seem to get a hold of this entire book. These aerial photos he's obsessed with as symbols for something else, something deeper in his psychology. And what kind of points to that, even from the beginning of the book, is it opens with a quote from Isaac Newton. "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in the now, and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." And that's Isaac Newton who said that. So that's the quote that opens this book. And I think whenever in a book you have an idea that is repeated almost the same way, maybe in a slightly different context, twice, you know that idea is of central importance to the book. And this idea, I struggle to remember when the first time it came up, or what the context of the first time it came up was. I know it was a conversation between Alfred, the geologist, and Arne, or one of the other scientists. And then it comes again at the end of the book. So it's once in the middle and once at the end. And it's almost identical, but it's this idea that you have a symbol that is kind of covering up the desire for something else, and that is actually what gives you the desire for that thing. So towards the end of the book, it's used in the context of like a repressed homosexuality is actually why a man is attracted to a woman wearing a certain type of pants. That's that. So, but it's this idea of the repressed thing is given you desire a thing because it is a symbol for a thing that is repressed, and this, I think, is supposed to highlight the psychology that is being represented by the meteorite that Alfred, when he was a boy, wanted a meteorite, but his father was trying to get him one, but passed away before he could ever gift his son Alfred a meteorite. And so Alfred spends his whole life trying to become this scientist, to trying to prove that some craters in the north of Norway were created by meteorites in honor of his father. In honor of his father. So in all, you know, if you were to take one psychological approach to this, you might think this is all because he never received that toy, that meteorite that he wanted when he was a young boy. Or perhaps it was the idea of this meteorite that he could never have that created an intellectual or a mental psychological desire within him, spiritual desire, if you want to say it that way, to discover this thing about the meteorite, an idea, to go in search of an idea instead of just a physical little trinket that might have made him very happy as a boy. So there is this complex psychology at the heart of the book that I don't know if one would consider me ruining this entire book by talking about that, but it's the kind of book that, like, there's all these mundane details, and talking about those things really isn't interesting. It's these ideas at the heart of the book, and maybe I'm exemplifying, even in my approach to analyzing this book, what I just stated. And it's an interesting thing because there are, like I said, there are a lot of philosophical discussions that kind of seem cut off before they are supposed to be. And I don't look at that as, it's definitely not lazy writing because it happens over and over. At first I was thinking maybe maybe this is just a little bit like lazy philosophy, right? And just stuff to fill pages. You're not sure. But as you move in the book and you see this cycle is repeating and you realize that this is happening over and over, that there is an idea about ideas here being formed, it's like you start to understand this isn't lazy writing, it's incredible restraint. And I think there is also a profound meditation in this book on the idea of science itself. And another thing that's done by breaking these philosophy sections up into kind of unfinished conversations, there are actually complete threads through the book. And one of them is the function of science. There's one part very early in the book, on page 8, right? The true function of science. Do you understand? Coal to burn in the stove, natural gas to boil an egg for breakfast, salt to sprinkle on it, mere household words as far as I'm concerned. What is science? Science is the titanic endeavor of the human intellect to break out of its cosmic isolation through understanding. But then later in the book, we have a far more haunting view of science that is discussed, in which the logical conclusion of science is revealed to be creating a machine that can essentially do science better than the scientist. And so the scientist, in the pursuit of progress, is undermining his own or her own seeking of glory or seeking of making a name for themselves, or seeking just the achievement. By pursuing science, the scientist is actually destroying their own achievement, destroying their own name, their own fame, by creating something that can do their own job better than them. And this is just one example of, I think, probably many threads that run through the book like this, that while you know, it's a reread book for sure. That's only one example I can think of. And again, if something is mentioned multiple times in a book, then it's usually for a reason. So yeah, there's just this really, there's something kind of Also, something I find really interesting, and of course this is a translation, but I find something so personality-less. I feel when I read this that the author cannot be found. The narrator, Alfred, is clearly his own character, is clearly being portrayed as a fictional character and is not the author. And yet, the author's personality, to me, Willem Frederik Hermans, is nowhere to be found in the book. And that's actually a stunning achievement for an author, to create something that almost seems completely an artifact outside the author himself, and yet is probably, it's almost impossible for that to be true. I'm not even, somebody who really believes in the death of the author, and I know there's others who feel that way. Like, knowing something about the author adds an enriched, not necessarily an enriched, but another layer to the experience of reading their work. You can't deny what you know in that sense. Like, if you know an author had a certain viewpoint, or an author experienced a certain thing in their life, it's impossible to unknow that or unlearn that. And your reading of a book will inevitably be influenced or touched by that. But in this case, knowing nothing about Willem Frederik Hermans, I cannot even speculate about really what his viewpoints are, because any outside viewpoint in the book is outside of the narrator, and the narrator himself is so unreliable and paranoid and untrustworthy that we just, he is a fictional character. So it's a really fascinating book in that way too, and almost sounds like I'm insulting the author, but really it's a high compliment as a writer, because I was quite engaged in this book the entire way. It really didn't feel in any way like a chore to read. I'd say the sections where they're kind of like dealing with just the physical hardships and physical realities of traveling, the mosquitoes, the camping, the peeing and pooping in the wilderness, stuff like that. Like, those descriptions could get a bit tedious, but that's on purpose. That's specifically used to sort of break up and ground the heady conversations. And there's one thing I remembered also as we got to the end of this book is how, to me, some of just the most viscerally terrifying stuff in books is when you have a character stranded in nature, like narrated being stranded in nature. And this is, I remember reading like the Jack London stories when I was younger, and those are some of the most terrifying stories for that very reason, just because you're forced as the reader to put yourself in that person's place and realize, like, yeah, nature is this thing, this empty thing, really, that doesn't care about your survival at all. And just that sort of harshness of nature has always really impacted me in literature, of course, too, being someone that throughout my life has been not really been somebody that's that, close to nature. I haven't really ever been into camping or the most I do is go out to a park that has a lot of trees and forest, or a day trip out to a state park or something like that. I've never really spent that time, that serious time in nature. So I find that to be kind of probably something I need to do. This book makes me reflect on this, but I definitely do, when I read stuff like this, it erases any sort of like romanticized view I might have of nature as a sort of Gaia, or like a personality that is looking out for my survival, I guess. But then again, when you talk about nature, everything we sustain ourselves from comes from nature. It's a big idea. What does it even mean? So anyway, that's a good place to stop. Beyond Sleep, very, very interesting book. One that's probably going to be worth, if not a full reread, definitely to go back in and peruse and think about some more. Very, very interesting book, and I definitely would read something else by this author at some point. So thanks, and we'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World.